This is from the 8th chapter of Mark. Then he called the crowd to him along with his disciples and said, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it. But whoever loses their life for me and for the gospel will save it." This doesn't happen as much as it used to. But driving around in Cincinnati, in the time when I worked there, I would often see a car here or a car there with a bumper sticker that said, "In case of rapture, this car will have no driver." Now, I'm not the sharpest crayon in the box, and it took me several years to figure out what that meant. I didn't know at first the theory of the end time in the last days that people know who drive their car and anticipate the rapture. But one day I picked up one of those pamphlets about salvation in hell that are perpetually left in grocery carts, or in particular put on the toilet paper holders in men's rooms. And I read through it and I found out why the car ahead of me isn't going to have a driver if the end time comes. There's a theology of the last days which says that just before Christ descends to earth to begin the last judgment, there will be a time of rapture when those who have been saved will be taken up to heaven with their earthly bodies intact. In the salvation tract that I picked up, the picture next to this idea showed a city street in the outside of a grocery store with some people floating off into the air and beginning to drift off toward heaven, and other people left on the ground gaping at them. It didn't necessarily show the car wrecks, but maybe they were there in the background. In case of rapture, this car will have no driver. Now, I can't question the integrity and faith of the person who left that pamphlet, because I believe that their yearning for God is surely no less than my yearning for God. And yet I can't help but notice the contrast between their belief, which says that Christ is not here now, but will be coming, and my own belief that Christ has come already and is already here, and is also coming in the future, what we call the now but not yet kingdom of God. Our Quaker theology of the cross draws most heavily on the Gospel of John, with particular reference to the first chapter, which is generally brought to our attention in this season. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things came into being through him, and without him not one thing came into being. What has come into being in him was life, and the life was the light of all people. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it. The true light, which enlightens everyone, was coming into the world. He was in the world, and the world came into being through him, yet the world did not know him. He came to what was his own, and his own people did not accept him. But to all who received him, who believed in his name, he gave power to become children of God, who were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God. When I think about the car with the driver who will be taken at the rapture, I think particularly about verse 10 in that passage. He was in the world, and the world came into being through him, but the world did not know him. I also think of the passage from the 13th chapter of Mark in which Jesus warns the disciples about letting the end time preoccupy them. Jesus says, stay alert. Otherwise, someone might just delude you. You know, many will come using my name and claim I'm the one, and they will delude many people. When you hear of wars and rumors of war, don't be afraid. These are inevitable, but it is not yet the end. And Jesus goes on to say that no matter what the disciples might hear about the end time, what they need to do is to continue the work of Jesus. When I hear about the rapture, I also think about the passage further on in Mark 13, where Jesus instructs his disciples to be watchful. Be on guard. Stay alert, for you never know what time it is. It's like a person who takes a trip and puts slaves in charge, each with a task, and enjoins the doorkeeper to be alert. Therefore, watch, for you never know when the landlord returns, maybe at dusk or at midnight, or when the rooster crows, or maybe early in the morning. He may return suddenly and find you asleep. But I'm telling you, I say to everyone, watch. When I put all those passages together about the light coming into the world and the false prophets and the necessity of carrying on with our work, which is Jesus' work, and of being watchful, I come up, I think, with a different way of looking at the world than the people of the rapture. The driver with a rapture bumper sticker is biding time, waiting for Christ to come into the world in order to leave the world and enter the realm of God, which is heaven. But Quaker theology says that God or Christ is already in the world, in this world. And I am not supposed to wait for God's arrival the way you might wait for someone at the airport, pacing up and down the hallway and wondering why the plane is late. I am supposed to wait the way you might wait for your wife to come home from work or your child to come home from school. You're waiting, but you're also balancing the checkbook or raking the leaves or fixing dinner. Our Quaker testimony about the presence of God within us, which necessarily means that God is always here in the world, and the necessity of our participation in the continuing, ongoing work of Christ. These things distinguish us from the driver waiting for the rapture. We don't believe that Emmanuel, God with us, came only once at Christmas. We believe in God with us daily. We believe that the light of God coming into the world is not a thing that did happen, but a thing that is still happening. And though we have many phrases for it, the inner teacher, that of God within each person, the inner seed, I think it is when we talk about the inner light or the light within that we are closest to recognizing what particularly we tend to celebrate in December, in the Christmas season, the light of God coming into the world, which shines in the darkness and which the darkness did not overcome. Although it can be hard to believe that sometimes. It's hard to believe sometimes that darkness has not overcome the light. Sometimes when I think about Christmas, I think about some of the Jewish theologians whose work I love and learn so much from. And I think of their reasons for not accepting Jesus as the Christ, as the Messiah. The prophets are clear, they say, that when the Messiah comes, he or she will inaugurate a new world, a world where the wolf will live with the lamb, the leopard will lie down with the kid and the calf, and the lion and the fatling together, and a little child shall lead them. But that hasn't happened, they say. There is still hurt and destruction in the world. The earth has not yet become as full of the knowledge of the Lord as the waters that cover the sea. And We can't really argue that point. We believe in Jesus as the Messiah, but it is hard to argue that we already live in the universal realm of God. So we give our answer that seems unsubstantial and yet which sustains us. We live in the now but not yet kingdom of God. We live in the imperfect kingdom of God, which is also coming towards us in its perfection. In other words, there is light shining in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Yesterday in the Washington Post, there was really moving story from a man named Ghassan Abu Sitta, a British Palestinian doctor who spent 43 days as a volunteer with Doctors Without Borders in Gaza City, tending to the wounded before he left Gaza. In London, he is a reconstructive plastic surgeon, and he arrived in Gaza on October 9th, the window after the Hamas assault on Israel, but before the Israeli invasion of Gaza. And as Israeli airstrikes were hitting Gaza City, hundreds of wounded were being brought to Al-Ali and Al-Shifa hospitals, which at that time were still functional. And this man worked around the clock, tended to the wounded. One of the things that he said was this: there were horrors, but at the same time, there were acts of love. I was saying to somebody, what happens when you live in the death world is that people start resisting the death world through acts of love. They become acts of resistance. There was a little boy. He was 3 years old. We didn't know his name at Al-Ali. I amputated his leg and his arm. And the following day, when I went to check up on him, the woman whose son was wounded in the bed next to him had him on her lap and was feeding him and her son because he had no family. We didn't even know his name because he was so young. These acts of love, these acts of kindness, people taking in people and even letting them stay in their houses for the whole war because they'd lost their homes. There was kind of almost a dissolution of individualism and a return to old communal life, that everything gets shared. Food gets shared. Medication gets shared. Houses get shared. And that kind of dissolution is amazing. It's amazing. He also talked about actually hearing the war come closer and closer to him as the bombs, which had begun in the distance, began to come close enough to rattle and break the windows. Said one really distinctive night, the bombing was so close and the building was shaking so violently. That was the night I kind of just sat down on my own and I just made peace with the idea that I wasn't going to live. It was extremely therapeutic. I was no longer anxious. I was at peace with myself and my choices in life. There was sadness, especially for my youngest. I would send audio messages to my boys just to make sure that they heard my voice on the day that I die, as morbid as that sounds. But they weren't morbid messages. They were just fun messages. I miss you. I love you. When the anesthetic at the hospital ran out, this doctor made the decision after 43 days to leave and go back to Britain. A decision that he still feels guilt over and yet knows there was nothing more he could do. But I think about how he made peace with his own death and continued to serve. And I wonder if it's possible that we cannot really understand what it is to be light in the world until, as Christ says, we have learned to lose our life to save it. But I also wonder, and maybe I also hope, because as you have heard me say before, I'm not committed to martyrdom. I wonder whether losing our life is another way of speaking of reorienting our life, of overturning in ourselves all the received tradition that we've grown up with about who matters in the world and who we take care of. I wonder if losing our lives is substituting care for our judgment, substituting agape love for our sense of how the world ought to be, what the rules should be, of substituting communities looking out for each other rather than individuals caring first for themselves. Many, many years ago, I was invited to a Christmas party where I got the chance to see for the first and only time what it looks like to light actual wax candles on an actual living Christmas tree. They had this large tree, my friends did, spreading over one entire corner of their dining room. On a certain part in the evening, they turned out the lights in the dining room and they began to light the candles. The kind of candles that we use in Christmas Eve services or any of those services where everybody lights a candle from someone else. But these were spread all over the Christmas tree branches. And there were several people who lit them, one then another, then another. Some of them started burning immediately. Some of them took a little longer. There was something really awesome and incomprehensible about seeing fire and a tree in such close proximity and yet at such a distance. We watched the tree in silence, but some part of me kept expecting the whole tree to burst into flame from the effects of these individual candles. The tree is a little bit like a Quaker conception of the now but not yet kingdom, I think. We know that light is already in this world. We feel it sometimes in ourselves, and we can feel it at work in others. We stand in the world like small candles on a vast forest of a tree. The ones of us who live up to the light that we have eventually burn brighter and brighter. And the ones of us who haven't felt the inner light move us to love, we're the candles that aren't quite lit yet. None of us know when the whole tree might catch fire, which would be the kingdom of God yet coming to us. But somewhere a candle or two candles or a whole village of candles, somewhere they might start to burn especially bright. Maybe that's the way it happens, that the flame burns hotter and higher until a branch catches and then another branch, and then a whole section of the tree is blazing away. Don't ever know when the tree might catch fire, but as the darkness turns to light, we can say, yes, this is certainly the realm of God, when the wolf and the lamb live together, and on all God's holy mountain, no one will hurt or destroy. We don't know when the tree will catch fire, but we know that it could. We know that it will someday. We watch and we tend our own light. We tend our flame. We tend the light of those around us. We watch and we burn as we are